Is this where we roll the intro?
I think so. Is that what we do?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cautious Coffee, episode 10.
Lucky number 10?
That was lucky number 7. But today we are here with Anthony and Alan from OG713 and AF Custom Shirts. They joined us on episode 9, yet to be titled. And they're back.
Go back and listen to it.
and they're back for episode 10, and we're focusing on education.
DeRae, this is something that we have been talking about, education, really for the last 10 to 12 months. And we knew that we were going to discuss it on Cautious Coffee. And it's not as simple as, okay, let's just talk about going to college or things like that. It's talking about the access.
You don't need it.
The access to education in this country, starting from the ground floor all the way up through grad school. So that's the focus of today's conversation.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But I don't know that we are all degree holders here. So let's establish that. Who all? You went to college?
I went to college. I didn't graduate.
Who needs it?
Same.
Same. Okay, we have two college dropouts like Kanye.
Yeah,
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
and I will. And here's the thing: I agree completely with you. And I know we'll get into more about the education side. Doesn't mean that we're saying don't go to school or not go to college. But what it does mean is for those who have planned not to attend a 4-year university or college, you still can be very successful.
Absolutely.
And there's things that both Alan, who is a creative director for his company, self-taught, and he'll go into that as well, and me being able to work for 2 Fortune 500 tech companies is a huge opportunity that's out there waiting for everybody.
And I think the message here is formal education might not be for everyone. It might not be necessary, but continuing to learn, that is something that I think is critically important. And for me, I went to Baylor University, somehow graduated.
Undergrad, right?
Undergrad, yeah. My
Interesting experience.
My GPA was somewhere between a 2.0 and a 4.0. Let's leave it at that.
Okay.
Well, you finished. I did undergrad at Northern Michigan University on a full scholarship to box there. So it was a trade-off, brain cells and education. So I made it work.
Yeah.
I did a graduate degree, public administration, and now I'm back at business school at Rice University. Go Owls.
Go Owls.
Sick and Bears.
We don't have a mascot for us non-college graduates.
We should work on that.
Why can't that be the mascot?
Yeah. The
absolutely.
spaceman.
Spaceman. Yeah.
Is our mascot.
I'll be the first to say, I already said it earlier, you don't need a degree.
100%.
And I think a lot of people may think you need it to go and be successful. You don't. And I think the value proposition of higher education, people really need to understand the value that they're getting out of it.
Yeah.
Well, we look at student debt right now, and just absolutely out of control. I mean, and you have to ask yourself. I know some people that are going and getting MBAs or have gotten MBAs, and they think that if they can stay in the same position that they're in, they're going to get a $40,000 to $50,000 a year pay bump because they have an MBA, and that's patently false.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you know this better than anyone else.
Yeah.
You use that MBA because you want to pivot to a new position or strengthen your skill set in somewhere, fill in those gaps. When it comes to education, we were all taught at a young age that you need to go to college. You have to go to college. Many of our parents didn't go to college.
Yep. Yeah.
My mom went for maybe a semester. My dad didn't even graduate high school.
Yeah.
And they're okay. You know, they're good people. We look at one of the most successful CEOs in this world, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yep.
Granted, he went to Harvard, more of an exception.
But dropout.
He dropped out. So many successful business leaders are college dropouts or didn't even go to college. And that just goes to prove that you can self-educate, you can learn, and you don't necessarily need to pay $40,000 a year to do that.
Yeah. I think the danger in thinking that way, or the trap I think some people might fall into is I don't need school. I'm going to get the opportunities that, they're going to fall into my lap. While that does happen, of course,
Look.
right, right place
Episode
at the right
7.
right place
7.
Yeah.
right place at the right time. I think one thing that the dropouts in the room have in common is that we dropped out because we saw We were motivated to find the opportunities and motivated to build our skill sets in a way that we saw a career path in front of us. And I know, at least speaking for myself, you know, I explored the things that I was interested in to the point where suddenly people started paying me for it. And then that's just blossomed into a career. And I think it would be a folly if we said that, you know, that would be the same experience for everybody. If there's some motivation and some passion there, that's going to be the key that kind of outweighs the lack of formal education.
Yeah. And you were even top 10 in your class?
Yeah, I graduated with very high school, very high like AP classes and all of those things. And I could have had a college career, but it wasn't something that I saw for myself. I was so excited to get out and start working and making connections, and that's what I did. So.
And for me, I started working at my local mall when I was 15 and was presented a really great opportunity working for a technology company right out of high school that led me into working for another Fortune 500 technology company for several years, about this past 12 years. And I had a mentor who led me and took me under her wing that taught me so many great experiences, but allowed me to fail and still be successful, which is the difference between a manager and a leader. I know we were talking a little bit about that and what that means. But I do agree that, you know, do you want your kids and yourself to go and experience that college life? Yeah, absolutely. Is it for everybody? Absolutely not. And we just have to be able to have programs and resources available for those that want it, meaning to go to a 4-year university or college, and for those who don't want to go to a 4-year university or college as well.
And even if you go to college, the education that you receive might not be what your career path ends up being. You know, for me, I was international studies, political science. I had no idea that I would end up being in communications for 14 years. Yeah, had no clue. And the reason why that happened is because I took an opportunity. You mentioned about the opportunity. I had a fraternity brother who I saw on the sidelines of every sporting event. I wanted to know how I could get on the court side, how I could get on the field and get paid to do it. And turns out he worked in athletic communications at Baylor. And I had a lot of transferable skills because I could write and I understood how to have conversations with people. Ended up getting a job there, loved it, and the rest is history. I've been in comms for 13, 14 years. And so although I never took a journalism class or a communications class, I still learned a lot along the way. And one of the biggest lessons that I had was the power of networking and the importance of networking, getting your name out there. Because you never know who you will meet, what kind of connections they have. And even if you do meet someone and develop that relationship, that friendship, you know, if it's a client or a vendor, you might not use them now, but maybe down the road you call on them and they absolutely deliver. And I don't know, I just think sometimes when I look back at my college time, it was the networking that I think I am most proud about.
That's where the value comes out of.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That's like half the value proposition for higher education. And we need to be honest with our children and our friends and others, letting them know, like, you're going here for the people. So you should choose the school for the people that are there. The grades, you know, do well enough, but spend time with people, build those relationships.
And part of it, you're a parent, and part of it is having parents that encourage you and support you regardless of what your endeavor might be. Yeah. You know, whether it's a traditional path or an untraditional path.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I hate to use this reference, but you know, you're a boxer, and we look at probably 2 weeks ago as this episode recorded, we had, you know, a spectacle, if you will, with Floyd Mayweather fighting Logan Paul. And I understand we're not going to dive into that, but if you look at like Logan Paul in particular, he's a guy that dropped out of college. And now he's one of the most famous names out there because he grinded. He figured out something in high school that worked for him, and he had parents that were supportive, went all in. Now, granted, he's got a checkered past, and not even going to go into that. Does he deserve to fight Floyd Mayweather? Probably not. But it just goes to show you that
a lot of ways to make money.
A lot of ways to make money. It doesn't have to be traditional.
Yeah, and with the prevalence of social media the way it is now, I mean, anybody can set up their platform and put their work out there to be seen. I think that's one of the things that is really exciting about the time that we live in, is that, you know, with the right ingredients, you can really make a name for yourself. Now, obviously, Not everybody will, but the practice that you get, the education that you get, and the things that you can learn from others in that platform, I think it's a really exciting time to be kind of a self-motivated creator.
Am I able to bring something up that's a little bit more taboo around education?
Yeah, do it.
Okay,
Roll those dice.
let's go. Are we trying to get snake eyes or double sixes? I don't know what we're gonna do. But education in America is not equal. And we've seen this.
It's exactly where we wanted to go.
Okay, good. So, and that's not the taboo conversation I'm about to go into. It's leading up to it. But education in America is not equal. And should we say in other countries, probably they're on the same boat with us, where some countries, they, the ones that rank number one in education, you see a process and a system in place that has allowed them to be in that number one spot. With that being said, it comes down to where you live, your ethnicity, your background, how you were raised, your zip code, and even those who can't afford education still doing things that they would never see themselves doing in their entire lives just to go to school, to put themselves, either pay for it in full or to get a loan out that's going to cost them about $100,000 to $200,000 after they get out of college or school in general, for them to go and start making $50,000 a year, most likely, right? Maybe $56,000 a year. Here's where that taboo conversation starts. I know so many influencers that I follow that have resorted to utilizing the OnlyFans platform to pay for school. And it's not to say, again, I'm not here to say that that is wrong, because sex work is work and it's legal by the way that they're doing it. But what I am saying is there's got to be something that has to go through our minds and people that represent us at a state and federal level to say, if our nurses and doctors and teachers and people who are going to school to be in this position have to resort to showing their self in a way that they would not normally show themselves to get money to pay for that education, something's wrong. And that's where the taboo conversation comes into, is like, where are the programs? Where are we helping each other to really help each other succeed and get to where their full potential is, if that's what they want to do? Like, if they want to be a nurse without doing something that they normally wouldn't want to do.
It's an interesting point that you bring up, because I believe the New York Times actually covered this last year, because during the pandemic, there was a huge spike in OnlyFans and subscription revenue. And we saw a lot of nurses and teachers who were completely overwhelmed with what was going on with COVID, the lockdown, isolation. They turned to those platforms and they realized that they could make $10,000 to $15,000 a month, rather than, only making $45,000 a year or $50,000 a year.
So I don't know that there's anything wrong with this.
No.
Oh, not at all.
But I think that brings up a good point too, because we do have some notes, and I'm going to read this, but DeRae posed a question, and the question is, and we actually did show notes for this, so we're really excited.
Whoa.
But
next level.
Do teachers really have a vested interest in our children's well-being and education, and are they properly incentivized? So those are two questions we want to focus on right now, but I do want to give you some data and context. So this is from The Atlantic, and it says the U.S. attracts most of its teachers from the bottom 2/3 of college classes, with nearly half coming from the bottom third. Now, if you look at the average salary for teachers in the state of Texas, it's about $53,000. The average salary in the U.S. is $64,000 for teachers. So when you start, you're making around that, and that's the cap. But if you go into finance or energy or engineering or start your own business, you might make $40,000, at the age of 22, 23, be happy about it. But when you're 40, you could be making 150K once you continue to grow, but it's almost capped at the education system. So with all that context out there, DeRae, what's your initial take on those two questions? Do teachers really have a vested interest in our children? And are we actually properly incentivizing teachers to get the best out of them?
Well, I think that's it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? If we're looking at the pool of teachers, I know some teachers. I don't know if they should be teachers.
Yeah.
We all have friends like that.
Yeah.
And you'll see some of those stories, when they're out on their lunch break. Like I said, mixed bag. And the system, I'm going to go as far to say it is broken, right? Because the top talent, and it's even like nonprofits, right? We have this weird thing with nonprofits, just like we have this weird thing with education where we don't incentivize the best, the brightest, the top to go and like be teachers, to work in nonprofits. So the system's, it's jacked. It's backwards. It's backwards.
But how do you get people that that are the best and are the brightest, rather than coming from the bottom half of their graduating class, to go into education? I mean, I know there are programs like Teach for America that do a great job, and they have some of the brightest college graduates go into underserved communities. The problem is they're only there for 2 years at most, and they're only getting paid $30,000 to $35,000.
Yeah.
And then they move on and go work at Deloitte or EY or another one of these big companies. They don't stay and teach. How can we eliminate that and actually make it a desirable job for college graduates?
Well, I mean, the obvious solution is pay them more. I say the obvious because if the thing that's pulling them away from the teaching field is a higher salary somewhere else, then that seems like an obvious connection. But obviously the question then is, how do we do that? And I think, like you said, the federal and state funding and support that is so lacking right now is part of the problem that, these teachers are making as little as they are and not being incentivized to stay. I don't know if that really speaks to whether or not they care about the students, that part of the question, because I think people go into teaching because they care about
some of them
shaping young minds, Well, some of them.
Or they start off that way.
Yeah.
There's always the exceptions, but that's not enough to keep somebody in the field if they're, looking to grow into a career that's going to put them on the same level as a finance person.
And burnout happens.
Yeah,
oh my gosh. Yes.
Burnout happens, especially when you have to pay all these additional fees as a teacher for supplies for your students. You don't just work the hours. You've got to go home and grade tests, papers, answer parents' phone calls, all of this.
Well, your teachers are taking care of your kids where, yes, of course, you're having to go to work or you're a stay-at-home mother or dad or whatever, but for the majority of the day, these teachers who have classes filled with like 25 to 30 students in their classroom, all individually different, having to teach, try to teach in a style that's going to grab all of their attention, it's draining. I know a couple of teachers who go through this, and they have stories of their own, and they love what they do, but at the same time, they come home and they drink a bottle of wine because they need it, right? I think from the point of, to answer your question around the incentivized side, why are we even having to vote, in my opinion, on raising the pay or giving federal money to teachers who we already know needs the help from supplies? And we also have certain schools who get so much more money because of certain tests that are presented to these students. And if a school has the resources already to have these students pass this test, then they get more funding. And if schools are already lacking in good quality teachers, lacking in funding, and not able to provide as much students to pass a certain test that they have usually every year, then they don't get as much money and funding as the other schools. So then it comes back down to where you live, what zip code you're in, what your ethnicity is, and parents fighting. There's an episode, I believe, on Netflix around a documentary of there's a lottery to get kids for preschools.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And you see these kids, these parents crying when they don't get picked because they know they have to go, their kid has to now go to this school that is run down, poor equipped with resources, supplies, all that type of stuff.
Let's talk about that locally. because this is a huge issue. And DeRae and I had this conversation last year, actually. City of Houston, Houston Independent School District, I should say.
Gosh,
Once the pandemic happened and started, and we had to go to remote learning, which was a challenge out there. And I know some of our listeners are parents and probably understood the difficulties of that. But a lot of our friends, at least, they still had homes that had internet. They still had an education themselves where they could teach and help
some
their
hired
students.
teachers.
Some hired personal teachers. Some people had that type of privilege, if you will. But Houston ISD, I believe the stat that I saw in last May was that HISD lost track of like 30% of its students because
thousands of kids.
Because they didn't have access to internet. They couldn't do remote learning. And then their parents weren't even picking up the phone and talking to them. So we just look here in the Houston area.
Yeah.
And I grew up in the Woodlands, a very privileged area. Now, again, my family did not have money. We had a very cheap home. My parents bought it for $40,000, but I still had access to the schools in the Woodlands.
Yeah.
Had we actually gone off of my parents' income and been in, a more underprivileged part of Houston, I wouldn't have had this. I'm not going to Baylor. Do I graduate high school? Maybe not.
Yeah, well, I would say, and I'm glad that we're really focusing on Houston, because last year, speaking of HISD, the state actually had to take over HISD because of how poorly run it was. Excuse me. Had to think back. But on that subject, it just tells you, one, I grew up in Sugar Land, and we were very fortunate. We were very privileged to have the things that we needed to have to be successful. The kids in HISD, there's so much help that's needed. A lot of people don't know where to start.
It's definitely sink or swim.
It is like there's no start line to even get back on track. I mean, if HISD lost 30,000 or 30% of their kids, that means they don't even know where the start line is, and it's more of a reaction than a being what's the word I'm looking at? Proactive to the situation.
So DeRae, how do we fix this?
You got
go
couple $1 billion.
I hate to cut you off, but I wanted to add. I think that there's it's a matter of foresight. I think the problem on a larger scale, and this is probably true for a lot of issues, things like climate change and some of these things that we know we have to take drastic measures to change to change for the better. They're not results that we'll see right away. So it's hard to see. It's hard for lawmakers to justify the amount of money that it's going to take to get there, because nobody wants to think that far down the road. It's not
no one wants to vote.
But here's the thing, I don't agree with that. And the reason why I don't agree with that is because there's money that's in our budget that we are spending on a federal and state level that we shouldn't be spending on. And that could be a whole another episode of what that looks like and where we can balance that budget to be able to provide those funds to education. Like, for instance, I'll say one thing around this, and then I don't want to go too much into it because I don't have a lot of facts or statements, but still building outdated instruments that are used for war, that we have no reason to be building these items, could be used to help fund education in so many areas here in Houston, in Texas, and in the United States.
But that's actually precisely my point, is that the reason people spend money on those things is because they're things that we can see and use now. And they're things that make us feel powerful, and
But it's outdated.
Toys.
But this is outdated technology.
Of course,
it's that's what. That's why I'm sorry if we're bickering a little bit. But this is where
bicker more. Happens.
But it happens. But this is where to me it is, and I'm very, if you want to call it very left, if you want to call it very extreme, whatever. My whole thing is, why are we still building outdated technology when we are investing billions of dollars in new technology that supersedes what we're building, and it's taking hundreds of millions of dollars out of our federal budget and state budget to build these things, instead of putting it back into teacher salary, programs for schools, the art programs, all these other
So this
things.
comes down to advocacy.
Yeah.
There isn't a loud enough voice to get those dollars steered into education, and you'll see that everywhere, state and federal level. It doesn't.
Well, and the words that voice uses, because I think giving context and a framework of thinking ahead, because we all know that if the education system was better and
People
college
don't care
was
about
cheaper,
your logic, Alan.
well, obviously, I mean, obviously, because here we are.
It's too logical. You're being too logical here.
But I mean,
one
if
cares.
you think about it, if you really got people to understand that an investment in our children and our education now means a much better world 20 years from now, then I think things might start to change. I don't know, I'm giving people too much credit. I'm an eternal optimist. So
well, we've got data to back that up.
Oh, wonderful.
So there was actually a story that came out. So when you're listening to this, it would have been the week of June 6th, June 7th. This is from S&P, and it said there was a stat that I sent to DeRae from a tweet from Axios. It says if black women were able to obtain college degrees at the same rate as white women from 1960 to 2019, the U.S. would have generated an additional $107 billion in economic activity.
wow.
That's an incredible figure. And so that goes to show you that because of these educational gaps that we have in our country, we're missing out on a lot of capital. And DeRae, I'm going to pose this question to you because the U.S., similar to Alan's point with the military spend and investment, wants to be the most powerful country in the world. And when you look at the numbers, GDP per capita is the best indicator of countries' wealth. Thank you for dropping that in the show notes. Top 5 countries: Luxembourg, Switzerland, Ireland, Norway, and the U.S. But when you look at the U.S. being a rich country, globally, our country ranks 24th in math, 21st in science, 15th in literacy. How is one of the richest countries in the world 15th in literacy and not at the top? Like,
I love this.
Why are we here?
Yeah, I wish they would teach logic in schools because we have a lot of policymakers out there who can't present like a logical argument that flows. And if it's illogical, we could go into religion, but we're not. Yeah. They should reject it, but they don't. So they follow the narrative, and if it feels good, they keep pumping that up.
Well, and I think it's the lawmakers' jobs, the elected officials' jobs to educate their constituents on why these things are important. If they might understand completely the long-term benefits of investing in education, but if their fan base, their constituents that
there are fans out there.
I mean, if you want to call
the
it
influencer territory. No, but if people who live, in a extremely rural area who aren't exposed to the accommodations you get in a city and things like infrastructure, then they're not going to understand why investing in those things is important or care. And so they'll vote the way they always have. And if they're not being educated on why these things are important, then it'll always stay that way.
Okay, but we're coming off of 4 years of administration of where facts were not presented regularly, and if facts were presented, it was always tied back to fake news.
You never know what to believe.
Well, not only that, but it was people were presented facts, and people were still not ready to accept what those facts might have been, whether it was in education or not. It was what base are you on, or what team are you on, and what facts are they presenting? I'm going to go and follow those.
Politicizing everything is so dangerous. And we mentioned this on the podcast a few weeks ago, or maybe it was the other podcast that I do, but with COVID-19, for example, we still don't know where it came from. Right? But the narrative early on was that it jumped from nature to humans. And Trump started pushing this idea that it came from a lab, and the media immediately said, nope, that can't be possible. And the reason why they said that is because it was Donald Trump, who is known to do conspiracy theories, mentioned that.
Big time.
A year later, that seems to be the prevalent theory now, that it was leaked from a lab in Wuhan. I mean, Dr. Fauci even testified about it. He discussed it in his emails. And so I think sometimes we let politics and our own agendas get away from what is actually best and serving the best interests of our country.
Back to logic and being able to sniff out bullshit. And that's not to say, that previous administration, they did it. The new administration, the administrations
before them,
all of them.
It's not something new. It's happened.
Right? It's just, it had a different flavor, right? So if you were just to reject everything that came out of that man's mouth, well, you're wrong. And if you are to accept everything that comes out of the new man's mouth, you're also wrong. just being able to, I want to speak to people not caring, because it's part of the human condition to want to further your interest, part of your tribe. You look like me, you walk like me, you talk like me. We're together in this. It's us versus them. And that's what you get, right? You get those folks out in the rural area. They're like, well, we don't care about the people in the city. It could even be people in California who don't want to pay the extra taxes to prevent the forest fires that devastate, their
here in Texas locally with winterizing,
right? It's like, I got to pay for this. Hold up now. Hold up.
It's like you guys said, thinking too short term.
Yeah. I mean, it's an epidemic in itself.
Yep.
And it's true. It happens on a personal, individual level, because the second we hear taxes are going up, we shut it down. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, but nobody takes the time to understand what a tax increase might get them. The road that they've been complaining about at the end of their neighborhood might actually get fixed if you pay whatever it is more a year in property taxes, or however this works. It's going into over my head territory.
We're talking about an allocation issue, though, right? Allocation of resources. It's even, we have starvation around the globe, but we have enough food.
We have starvation here in our city.
We have more than enough food.
We have enough stuff. It's just it's being mismanaged. We're just poor stewards.
It's being hoarded by people.
It's the COVID vaccine too. There's plenty of, I wouldn't say plenty of supply, but there's a large supply, but it's the logistics, the distribution model, which is why the rich countries have the vaccine and the poorer countries don't, and they don't know when they're going to get it. America just bought, the U.S. just bought 500 million doses of Pfizer vaccines to help provide around the world for a lot of those those third party. Where was this?
Third world country.
Where was this like 6 months ago?
Oh, absolutely, right. And I think it comes down to one. Take care of home base first.
Absolutely.
And then, now let's, it reminds me of the airplane. When you get on the airplane, the stewardess starts saying about how, there's exits here and here.
I never hear that. I've got the headphones on.
Same here. I always look at the pamphlet and I'm like, okay, I'm good, right? And I put it back in. But you know how she says, put your mask on first, then go ahead and put your kid's mask on afterwards, after you secured yours. That's the mentality that around the world that we all have. Going back to education, I'm not a teacher. I haven't taught or been in the education system at all. I have friends that are teachers, and hearing them talk about some of the smallest things that they wish that they had access to, or they had funding for, or how they have to pack an extra lunch because they have a kid who doesn't have food, or have to see their kids come in with bruises. And if they were to say anything that could jeopardize them putting that kid in harm's way, they wouldn't know what to do. And I think there's so many different layers that go into the whole education discussion of not only with funding, but how are teachers being trained for ongoing education?
Curriculum.
Trash. Right? Because a lot of teachers, in a lot of ways, even though they might not have this degree, they're also therapists. They're counselors in their own way. And some of these kids look towards that teacher to help them grow and develop. I don't know how many success stories I've seen kids who graduate who say, give a big shout out to their teacher, because if it wasn't for that teacher, they would probably be behind bars, dead, on drugs, or who knows what else.
Yeah, and we look at more stats. We're coming with you with data on this episode, but high school dropouts 8 times more likely to go to prison, more likely to need welfare, 50% less likely to vote, and earn half as much as college grads. And the people that do make it out of communities, sometimes they might not have the best family support network, and it is those teachers that are providing them that guiding light and encouraging them to push themselves and to maybe apply for that scholarship so they can get out and maybe provide a better future for themselves and their children and grandchildren. So how I think it comes back to incentivizing teachers again. And what can we do to incentivize the best and the brightest to graduate college like they do in Europe? Like in Europe, they essentially have like a bar exam, right, for teachers. And so if you're a high school teacher or a primary school teacher, you have to be certified, and not just the exam that you can take and study for, and you need like a 60 or 70 to pass here in Texas.
One day want to be a teacher.
Yeah, that happens here in the United States. It's actually celebrated in Europe if you're a teacher.
Yeah.
And I think we need to have that here.
Culture issue.
It's a culture issue. We're not prioritizing education, or we're not prioritizing education for enough people. It needs to be, I think, universally applied. At least have the access to this. And I think it comes down to paying the best and the brightest. Maybe it's a $75,000 starting salary, $80,000. And if you do that,
it'll help a lot.
You're going to have some brilliant engineers who are going to be able to, maybe not go into a dying industry like oil and gas.
Or how about stop teaching kids stuff they don't need to know?
Yeah.
How about that?
Thank you.
How about we let them
what?
focus on stuff they're good at?
Like what?
Like
calculus,
geometry.
I use calculus all the time.
I don't.
No, I agree with you to a degree. I think exposing kids to a lot of subjects is a good way for them to kind of figure out where their interest is.
But do you need to do it all the way K through 12, or can you stop at like 8th grade and then let them choose, or their parents choose?
I think even a bigger problem than that, because I don't have the answer to that.
We're speculating here.
Yeah.
Sure. But the other thing that happens is that I completely lose my train of thought.
Well, while you're thinking about that, so this is something that I actually, working with my technology company for several years as we were going around helping train teachers on applications that they use on a day-to-day basis. Part of that was understanding where how education started, which was
1900s,
right,
1800s.
but it was more when we were really teaching in America, it was more around, we were in the industrial age, there was a lot of manufacturers, and so the way that we were taught back then, or the way that our great-grandparents were taught back then, was in that same mindset. That's where you started seeing all the desks being individualized, everybody working on one specific thing, and then you kind of move in an assembly line. Compared to now, where it's so influenced or encouraged to be partnering again, working with others, understanding the importance of working with a team, and even seeing some teachers take that extra step to say, you know what, I'm going to rearrange our classroom from an individual desk and lines to groups of 4, where there's projects that you have to work on together starting in elementary, because we didn't really learn about that or really start doing that until college, when we had to do a group project, right? Yeah. And in college, that's when you that's when they start getting us ready for the real world, basically.
And college teaches you how to learn.
Exactly.
Yeah, you go to college to learn how to learn.
Yeah. That's when you learn so much about some of the like Christopher Columbus and how really bad he was. We won't go on that, but
there's a really good book actually. I read it in high school. It's called Lies My Teacher Told Me. I can't remember who wrote it, but it goes on to a lot of the history that we were taught as kids just isn't true. In terms of, I think it was Betsy Ross with sewing the flag, like that actually never happened. There's no documented proof that she sewed the flag, but that's done to keep kids interested. And the other one is Christopher Columbus, and so many people thinking the world was flat at the time.
Right.
100% false. Yeah. Nobody believed that.
There were really smart people who thought that too. Like once upon a time.
But once upon a time.
But not back in 1492. Like it was significantly before that. And there are idiots now who still believe the world is flat.
Oh my gosh.
But that's
a different episode.
That is
harsh.
The point is, some of the things that we're teaching kids aren't based in fact, but based in spirit, literature, just to keep kids engaged.
Yes, and this America First patriotism, whitewashing of history, nationalistic. And what I was going to say a second ago too was the thing that's missing is the life skills, the
empathy.
Not only how to
skills.
even more practical than that is, taxes and applying for a loan and bouncing a checkbook, whatever that means, whatever we call that.
Back then, we
Where
had
does
to
money
learn.
come from? Where does money
Grows on
come
trees.
from?
Because you get
Mom
thrust
and dad.
into an adult, and I think the government just hopes that we don't know how to do our taxes, so that we just are always in the dark about how it works. That's my own conspiracy theory, but
well, the other thing is that you also have kids who own furniture and cars, because it's and the reason why I say that is because their background or parents have taken credit on their names because they don't have enough to provide for their family, so they're already starting at a disadvantage in life by having bad credit. And I agree with you, if we were able to substitute a lot of these things back when you were in high school, even in middle school, when we're learning. Like I remember having to do chores, of course, when I was starting at 7, 8 years old. And every time I did a chore, I earned money. I put it in my bank because my parents gave it to me. I was privileged enough to have that. Where if that stuck into school, not saying that we need to incentivize our students by all means.
Bribery helps with education.
But if we were able to instill that education back into our kids growing up, I think we would be better off in a very different way. So,
did you know, I learned this recently, that the reason they use bells in school, or at least when they started using bells, was because they thought that would help train kids to know that the bell meant the shift is over, and like in a factory setting once they left, that would be just kind of second nature to them.
Let's move on. Let's go to the next thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's that whole factory mentality.
I do think life skills are important to learn. Right now, I look at me and I love traveling. I love credit cards and points and trying to get as many points as possible. I didn't know about credit scores until after I graduated college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew about the importance of having good credit. I didn't know what the difference was between, say, a 500 credit score and an 800 credit score. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't until after college and I had terrible credit.
Why did we not learn that?
Exactly.
It's such an important and critical thing for an
basic,
Why is that
basic life
still
skills that
not
you need.
taught today? I guess that's where it comes back down
and
to.
People granted student loans, that's a completely different issue, but there are so many people out there.
Let me tell you why.
That aren't paying student loans.
Yeah, I would love to hear.
The debt market
overshadows
the equity market.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's exponential. It's the biggest financial instrument out there is debt. Everywhere, everyone has it. We left the gold standard. We introduced credit cards. Why would we want these people to know what good credit looks like? We need them to go out and borrow.
Yep.
Let's not teach them about this.
Taking advantage of people.
Yeah. It's the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation.
I want to mention something.
Very
I know
fascinating.
we're running long.
Some of this might be a bonus episode. So if
You mentioned black women.
Yeah.
Okay, they are educated at a greater rate than black men, right? Who are sometimes incarcerated or,
Killed.
They
Let's be
find
honest,
themselves
yeah,
in
put it out there.
other types of situations where they're unable to get educated. All right, so think about that. Like, if they were able to have access to that, and I mentioned just constitutionally having access to just all the other shit white people had access to.
Yeah.
Like, don't you think the black community would be better off?
Yeah.
Right? Just give me what the rules say I can have, and then we're good to go.
Absolutely.
I think it goes back to an episode 9 when we talked about.
Look at you
I know,
dropping the
I'm already
references.
dropping
I
episodes.
can't even remember them. I can't keep them straight.
Episode 9 when we talked about equity over equality. And we talked about, I specifically said, we're not fighting to gain more rights.
Yeah.
We're asking to have the same rights as everybody else.
That's it.
And it goes back to the same thing. These kids that are in these situations where they already know that they're not going to go to college because their family didn't go to college. They don't have the money. Yeah, or they didn't eat dinner last night.
They don't look
whatever.
at it as a realistic objective or goal.
Exactly. And so to be able, and I think you said this, DeRae, either in episode 9 or in this episode, so sorry, it's bleeding through, but you were talking about seeing all the presidents in the past and only seeing white men as presidents.
Losing team. I'm on the losing team.
You're already on a losing team.
You know what I see in the history books? Black people hanging from trees.
Yeah.
I don't see white people hanging from trees.
No.
What does that do to me mentally?
Yeah.
Or the millions of little black kids.
Same thing with black women. And being able to see Barack up there now, being able to have representation up there, right? Now being able to see Kamala Harris up there, representation from a VP side. Yeah. What does that do for, those kids that are growing up and being able to see themselves in that position?
It's inspirational, especially when you see, the inauguration that happened and Amanda Gorman. And the poem that she recited, it was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
That stuff sticks with you.
And she's 21 years old, Harvard
Very
grad.
successful young lady.
Getting that opportunity, that platform. I mean, that inspires so many people to be able to see someone that looks like them that's also young, and having a platform like that. I mean, that just can do so much. But I think it comes down to a few things. Again, teachers, incentivizing teachers to get the best and the brightest, and also being honest about our history as well. I mean, we look at the past few weeks here in the United States. There's been a lot of news coverage and tell-all stories about the Tulsa riots or Tulsa massacre. There's been a lot of coverage about that. Prior to George Floyd getting killed, nobody even had heard.
What's a Black Wall Street? Never heard of.
Oh yeah,
you know, most people.
But it's things that you don't learn about in school because we're uncomfortable with our history. And I think in order for us to be our best selves, we've got to learn about the good, got to learn about the bad as well.
Yeah,
I agree.
Because if we don't learn about the bad, we're doomed to repeat it.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So can I say this really quickly?
You sure can.
To your viewers? I would like to actually hear from the teachers out there watching this. What do you think you would be that you would need or would like to see happen from an incentive, kind of incentivized way? Not only for you to continue on as a teacher, right, but to get other teachers that are at that level that's needed for these schools. I mean, it would be great to hear the discussion and carry on that from their perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of our listeners probably know someone that's a teacher. Maybe they are teachers themselves, or maybe someone in their family is a teacher. So if you do have any comments or anything like that, we definitely want to hear feedback, and just drop it to us. Just search @CautiousCoffee on all the social platforms. Visit our website, cautiouscoffe.com, and we definitely want to hear your feedback.
And if we got anything wrong, let us know that too.
We probably did.
You got 4 men up here talking.
One teacher.
Not one teacher.
We're going to tell you what's going on.
But we do care about education. And I know when I've gone out and given talks to young people, especially young black people, I tell them to wear their disadvantage as a badge of honor.
Oh yeah.
Overcoming stuff, go after and attack stuff. You can do it. You're just as smart. You're just as capable, right? But you come from maybe a rougher patch in life. That's going to be an advantage. Like your disadvantage is going to turn into an advantage long term. No one will outwork you.
Yeah.
And I tell them embrace that shit.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand. I'm from the same place.
Don't forget where you came from. Yeah.
Don't forget it. And like I said, a badge of honor. Just know when you walk in a room, you're going to be the hardest worker. Mm-hmm. Don't let anyone outwork you.
Love that. I think that's a great way to close episode 10 of Cautious Coffee. And Anthony, Alan, thanks so much for joining us.
This worked out.
2 episodes.
I know. This was great. Thank y'all so much.
And I like the standing. Let us know what you think. Should we stand more for podcast? Do you like the setup?
We're going to have to get an elevated table.
Yeah. Well,
hey,
it's been fun.
IKEA on sale.
Yeah, I was like, this is like IKEA, right?
Yeah.
We said follow us.
Yeah.
You could reach out to either of us on our social media. You can reach out to these fine fellas. Come buy some T-shirts. Go to the website.
Check out
order something.
This logo. It's so awesome.
OG713. It's our Pride logo. Of course, we do custom shirts as well. It's no minimum order at AF Custom Shirts. So you can always go to our Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or our website.
OG713.com.
And AFCustomShirts.com.
We've got some cool merch, so be sure to check it out. OG713. We'll drop the link in the show notes below. But I want to thank everyone for, again, listening to this episode, supporting Cautious Coffee so far through 10 episodes, and we hope to have at least 90 more for the podcast. But
when does season 1 end?
10 more episodes. 10 more episodes. But on behalf of our guests, Anthony and Alan, we really appreciate you guys joining us, and DeRae, as always. But my name's Austin Staton. We'll see you next week.